joining us today, everyone. We are here for supporting employees with psychiatric disabilities before, during, and after a mental health crisis. Then you are in the right place. We'll do some intro and visual descriptions. My name is Dolkart, and I cover my name tag now sideways. I use she, they pronoun, and I am white. My ethnicity is African Jewish, and I have short brown hair. I'm wearing a black jumper and a leopard print top. I'm good.
I'm Gillian Morgan. I use she, her pronouns. I am also white. I have medium length brown hair, wearing a green sweater, and black pants.
And thank you to folks who are also joining us online. We ask that if you can please make sure that you're muted and turn your video off unless you're speaking. We'll be really delighted to answer any questions that come up at the end. If you want an acronym bust by accident, or if we have a clarifying question, then feel free to hear as well. And thank you, Hope, for moderating today.
Okay, so before we get started, we want to offer a big caveat. We acknowledge that the story that we're going to share today is one of many stories about navigating mental health crises, and it won't apply to everyone's supervisory situation. All employees and supervisors are on their own path, and they might be at a different point in this journey. We feel really lucky to have a working relationship that allows for trust and vulnerability as we continue to navigate all the complex parts of being a human in the workplace. We share our own story as a case study, but not as a roadmap. Our presentation includes information about some of the resources that are available to support state employees and their supervisors that we have found helpful. We're not experts in human resources, although we're getting better. But luckily, we have a whole team of folks who are. The Department of Human Resources has really helpful resources. They've been a really helpful partner to us in sort of navigating our own experience, and we encourage folks to reach out to them for their needs.
And there's some really awesome sessions today, including the one that a few of us just came from on the ADA introduction that has some really supportive tools as well. So to go over some of our session objectives for today, we really want to acknowledge our shared obligation to repair past harm of state Vermont institutionalization and lack of informed consent of people living with disabilities.
We're going to share our story of navigating a complex psychiatric disability as a supervisee team and share our lessons learned along the way.
And then we'd also like to offer some tips and tricks and resources that are available to us as state of Vermont employees. So things like the Family Medical Leave Act or FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Insurance or FMLI, the Sick Leave Bank, and other resources as well. And there's this really great quote from this writer and disability justice leader that many of you have probably heard of, Mia Mingus, and the theme is around interdependence. So it says, interdependence moves us away from the myth of independence and towards relationships where we are all valued and have things to offer. So that theme will come up again and again, coming about this, honestly, on this lifetime and throughout this work and this presentation. So the next slide says, what are psychiatric disabilities? And I do want to acknowledge that this slide is a little deficit-based, and I would like to be more strengths-based. So I want to put that out there. The first question is, what is a psychiatric disability? And so these are also known as psychological disabilities or mental health disabilities, and are invisible or hidden disabilities at many times. This is a diagnosed mental illness or just a way someone is wired and can at times limit someone's ability to perform job duties, to learn, or participate in other life activities. So some examples include depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, attention deficit disorder, and anxiety. And then this next section, we talked a lot about stigma as a theme during this year's conference, and it's come up again and again. So I do want to speak to stigma. I also want to speak to pride. So a lot of us have been working on kind of understanding and unpacking our own ableism and internalized ableism. And this is that subtle and not so subtle shame and ridicule that our society places on individuals who have mental illness or psychiatric disability. And that often keeps mental illness in the closet. It keeps people afraid from sharing their experiences. So negative stigma can really prevent people from asking for help or getting treatment. And then on the flip side of this comes disability pride and mad pride movements. And these have really offered space for folks to reclaim these aspects of our identities. And these movements really recognize and value and kind of bring people together so there is this supportive space to share and celebrate the lived experiences around disabilities and mental health disabilities that make us all humans. And I also want to acknowledge that like power and privilege we know are shaped by racial identity, by gender identity, and other parts of the human experience, so that disability status is not in its own bubble by itself. And there's some resources at the bottom of this page. If you're joining us on Teams, you can actually click right on these in the live function, or hopefully you can. And you can also access these on the SharePoint platform. Okay, so we talked about how one of our objectives, this is slide 6, by the way, for folks who are following along. One of our objectives today is to acknowledge the harm, especially around language and treatment of people with psychiatric disabilities. So we know that right now, the building that we're in, the original parts of this building that house our offices of the Agency of Human Services was called the Vermont State Asylum for the Insane in the 1890s. Ooh. Luckily, we moved away from that language, but according to a V.T. Digger piece on the evolving view of the mentally ill, that asylum opened largely in response to the inhumane treatment at the time. So the examples of this included confinement by chains, nearly drowning patients experiencing mental health crises. I should have a real trigger warning on this slide. So folks who were experiencing mental health crisis were sometimes plunged in freezing cold water, and then also given dangerously large doses of opium. So the Vermont State Asylum for the Insane was one of the first 10 psychiatric hospitals in the U.S. And while it was an improvement from some of these pretty intense treatment and inhumane treatments that we discussed earlier, there were also still cases of sometimes treating depression with laxatives and narcotics, and also focusing on physical labor as a source of healing. So kind of thinking of the still problematic pieces that were happening in that asylum. And then mass institutionalization to prevent people from having children, sterilization, and family separation were all part of the eugenics movement in Vermont in the 1920s and 30s. And in 1931, Vermont sterilization law passed, which specifically named the target of anyone who was deemed to be a quote unquote idiot, feeble-minded, or an insane person. And so while consent was technically required, according to Mercedes de Guardiola's research in Vermont for the Vermonters, the history of eugenics in the Green Mountain State, there were many sterilizations for this population that were forced, and there was no chance for individuals to understand the full weight of this procedure. So those are just, brushing the surface of this history. There's some additional resources that you can find here. Some are from the Vermont Historical Society, and also acknowledging that the Human Rights Council and also the I didn't write it down. Anyways, we have so many state resources that touch to these to this history, and it's no wonder we've had so much stigma around mental health, right? Okay, back to this slide. This is a photograph. For just a little bit of a description, it's really blurred, and there's people standing in a gallery. Some are maybe walking, some are maybe moving. The purpose of this picture is to try and invoke the sensations of what it feels like to have heightened sensory overload. Um, so at age 19, when I was in my second semester of college, I started to experience this kind of rush of like constant ideas and heightened senses and very little need for sleep. And this intensified over the course of the next few months and escalated into mania, which was honestly thrilling at times. And it also was very unsustainable. So I knew that there had to be some kind of intervention. So I was hospitalized twice over the course of the next few months. And I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. Luckily, I had a really solid system of support from family and friends. I had access to medical care, and I had a summer to adjust to some new medications. And now I'm thinking about my mid-20s and my, being able to kind of not even be thinking or trying not to think about my psychiatric disability most days. I was thinking, it doesn't really make sense to tell people in my life. Like, why would I tell anyone at work? It just didn't feel like that was something I wanted to do because I had internalized a really harmful message, which was that disclosing this kind of information was not professional. So that was like, early work days. And then when I came to work for the state in the fall of 2019, I had a depressive episode while I was working at Economic Services. And my supervisor back then told me about the Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA. And I didn't even know that it had existed before coming to work for the state, and before I was in that situation, which I really wish I had known earlier with some anticipation. And at the time, I lovingly referred to this as F my life, but it really was a game-changing tool. And knowing that I could get that help that I needed, and that my job would be protected, and I could take that extended leave time was great.
Oh, you we have a lot.
Whoa! Thanks for doing it. Yeah, I had the space to recover. And then come 2022, I've been at the health department for 2 years, but with many of you in this room who are on their crisis and emergency risk communications team, we went through a lot together. And if you can get through the COVID response together, like, it really makes your relationship, right? So I have some really strong working relationships that I'm really, really grateful for. And I was also going through this process of like checking my own racism, my own ableism, my own kind of ways that I challenging and unlearning some ways that I had learned to move through the world. And I finally was starting to disclose my disability at work in a way that I hadn't before. I learned I was pregnant, and I was like, oh, I know that most bipolar have some stuff that happens in postpartum. Or there's a high percentage of folks that experience either mania or serious depression in postpartum, not to make light of the situation. So I was like researching, trying to set up support. Gillian and all, like a bunch of colleagues were sharing like some different supports that could support the postpartum mental health needs. And I was really pleasantly surprised when in the beginning, like, yes, there was sleep interruption, but I felt like I'm okay. Like, okay, this is okay. We got this. However, it was kind of bound to happen. Not bound to happen, but there was a higher possibility of me having some postpartum mania. And when I got back from parental leave in the spring of 2023, I started having trouble sleeping. It was, the rushing thoughts spiraled into magical thinking and then into paranoia, right? So there was like extrasensory input. This kind of image on the screen is kind of how I felt just like trying to respond to an email. It was just like whoosh, a lot of just like sensory overload. And that became a major obstacle. So it was pretty clear that I needed to take some steps back and get some support. And so, yeah, grateful that, Gillian was able to support me through some of these episodes and being able to access FMLA and then FMLI the second time around was really game changing. So thanks for being there.
I'll share just from the supervisor's perspective, so much gratitude to Eve, right, for her willingness to talk about this. Again, we recognize our supervisory relationship is not everybody's, and so some people are not safe or do not feel safe disclosing any kind of disability. And so I think we both feel pretty lucky that we're in this situation and that we're doing it together. As a supervisor, we're sort of navigating this for the first time myself, really uninformed about bipolar disorder, about psychiatric disability in general, about disability at large. I really was not prepared to be the best support that I could be. But I had a lot of questions floating around my head. Like, I'm sure some of you are thinking them right now. Like, how do I support this person without controlling them? How do I offer support that doesn't feel patronizing? Am I allowed to talk to their spouse on their behalf? Like, lots of questions that get really complicated really fast. And it felt to me at the time like no one had ever done this before. I certainly had not. And I didn't really even know what to do next, other than the initial concern of like safety for Eve. But then what do you do? Like, how do you support this person through this process? So lots of questions floating around. I was really, really lucky to have a lot of help from a couple of key people, one of whom is listening. So shout out to my supervisor, Helen Reed, who was a really helpful, just listening ear and really helped me. Like, as we all do, have this bias that's just baked into my brain. And I don't want it to be there, but it's there. And I think my job as a supervisor in lots of situations is making sure that we have processes and tools in place to sort of mitigate that bias, stop it from taking up as much of the space in the room as it would otherwise. So the other really helpful resource was Kate Manal, who's our HR rep. It was really helpful to be able to call somebody and say, like, I don't even know how to ask these questions, and I don't want to say anyone's name yet, like hypothetical, until I feel comfortable changing that. And she was a really helpful person to be like, here are the resources you should think about. And I think what we know now is what we're bringing here today, which is just some like initial thoughts to have as either an employee with a disability, a psychiatric disability, or as a supervisor who, whether you know it or not, you may have an employee who's going to need this kind of help at some point. So just some ideas. And again, the caveat that we're not experts and this is just our experience. Exactly. Oh, wait, I want to say one more thing. I don't know if other folks were in the ADA session earlier, but they were talking all about that law, that policy, and they talked about thinking outside the box as a really helpful kind of mindset to have when you're supporting an employee that has a disability. And it really just sort of resonated with me because I think that's what we talk about. Like, there are a lot of rigid structures in place through the bargaining agreements and lots of policies and HR language that can get really complicated. But in between all of those things, there's so much room for like gentleness and flexibility that can be where you tend to the whole humanness of the people that you work with. So I don't know, maybe
for sure. And even beyond like psychiatric disability or disability in general, like thinking about these as supports for anyone who comes through our doors, right? Okay, so one of the things that I got information about but wanted to be more prepackaged was a list of resources that would have helped Eve and her family kind of navigate this.
and would have helped me as a supervisor understand even that like 30,000 foot, what the heck is FMLA? And so we've sort of summarized some of that here for y'all in case it's helpful. And we're highlighting a few things that we wish we'd known in advance, and they might sound familiar to some of you. The first one is family medical leave, or known as FMLA. FMLA allows for up to 12 work weeks of job protection in a 12-month period when an employee deals with their own health issue, that of a family member, of the birth of a child, or the adoption of a child, or the illness of a dependent child. That's like the most high-level description of FMLA. There's a ton of information about it on the HR website, but these are the key points. It also protects your health insurance coverage for that period of time under the same terms and conditions as if the employee had not taken leave. And then employees can take that time either paid or unpaid, depending on what leave is available to them or what they have in their leave bank. Good to know, anyone who's had a child may remember that if you are not putting, as you're doing your worksheet, if you put more than 19.99 hours of unpaid FMLA time on a pay period, it starts to impact your leave accrual. So that's like the magic number to keep in mind. And there's more information about that in the bargaining agreements and our contracts, but that's like, that number's burned in my brain for the rest of my life. And then if you have questions about FMLA, the DHR website has a lot of information for both employees and supervisors. That's pretty helpful. For supervisors, it gives you some kind of questions that you might want to ask about, like, there a designation, an FMLA designation, and what does that all look like? And then there's an email there for the leave management unit and a phone number to reach them if you have questions.
And they're super responsive, which is really nice. You get like an automated email at first, and I was like, oh no, this is gonna take forever. And they were like super responsive and really helpful.
The next one is family medical leave insurance, which is sort of new. It provides eligible state employees with 60% of their pre-leave base weekly wages for up to 6 weeks in a benefit year. So that's 6 weeks of 60% of your normal paycheck, which is pretty awesome. That could be the difference between someone being able to take something like parental leave or not, or FMLA or not. Vermont's FMLI program is managed by a vendor. Oh, sorry. It covers the employee's serious health conditions, that of a family member, a lot of other things. It's managed by a company called the Hartford, which we learned in Kentucky. And I know from Eve's experience that they have an online portal that's really helpful, but it can be helpful to figure out how to access it and use it ahead of time before you need it, especially if you have something like a psychiatric disability where like you might not want to look at computers for a little while. It can be helpful to kind of test it out. So if you have questions, their website is there. There's a phone number to call the Hartford, and also your HR manager administrator might have information. And DHR has a really helpful representative locator if you know any of your HR rep is. There is the sick leave bank, which is actually 2 banks. As state employees, we have the opportunity to donate our annual and or personal leave into the bank of our bargaining unit. So I'm a supervisor, I would donate it into the supervisor bargaining unit. That leave is then sort of scooped up and reallocated as sick leave to applicants from your same bargaining unit who have exhausted their sick leave and need a little bit of help. Good to know in advance. It's application based, and they're reviewed. The applications are reviewed by a sick leave committee, which meets monthly. So there's sort of a timeline to that. There's procedural. Applications have to be submitted before the monthly meeting to be considered, obviously. And then if you have questions, DHR website has a lot of information and your HR manager. This is the last one of these, Invest EUP, which I will sing about until I lose my voice. I love Invest EUP. It's a nonprofit located in Vermont, contracted by the state of Vermont to offer 24/7 short-term counseling and referral to all state employees and their household members. Their support is available at no cost for up to 5 counseling sessions. After that, they help you get into an insurance-based source of, yeah. So it offers support for all kinds of things: mental health, physical health, legal and financial concerns, workplace issues. They also provide consultation services for supervisors, managers, and workplace teams. I've used them for myself. I've used them for my team. It's really helpful. What I really like about InvestEAP is that they know that they're supporting the state of Vermont as a workplace. And so they come with that kind of preloaded thinking that they're going to help you kind of figure out what's appropriate for you in a workplace setting and what is something that, like, oh, Eve might want to talk to her own folks about that. And it can really be helpful, kind of check on your thoughts. Their website's pretty great. Good to know in advance. Make an account now before you need it. It's pretty easy, but it's frustrating if you need it and you don't already have the ability to log in and get.
Yeah, really grateful to have you. So I'll talk a little bit about some health department resources, and for folks in different areas of AHS, you probably have other sources of support as well, and other parts of the state. At the health department, we're really fortunate to have two other resources that support us and help us support each other. So our employee resource groups, we have one that's specifically for folks with disability and chronic illnesses called Inform, the worksheet that we'll be getting to a little bit later in this session. And also we have a peer support network that Gillian and I are both part of. We're trying to offer space for folks who just want to talk through any issues that are coming up. So either for the chat, or maybe if you want to write it down on your notebook or just think about it for yourself, think about what other resources your own workplace or department might have that goes beyond what our state offers.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the questions and things to think about that we found helpful before, during, and after a mental health crisis. And we're on slide 15 for anyone that's.
Thank you. We were forgetting about the numbers. Luckily, hopefully you can see them at the bottom for folks joining online. And if you want to go back to anything after this session, just let us know. Happy to go back. So this slide is about before a mental health crisis and on the supervisee side of things. So it was really helpful to have a personal health, personal plan that I was able to make with my healthcare providers. When I talked to Howard Center First Call, they work with the Stanley Brown planning worksheet. This one that we have linked here is from Mental Health America and is a general crisis planning worksheet that's a little bit more accessible. There's so many out there. So this is just one of many templates. But it's really helpful to think about also making then a workplace plan. So you can do this on your own. You can do this in cahoots with your supervisor. If you're thinking about, like, what are my communication preferences right now? I can really just text, like, I don't want to do other things. Then name that. If you're like, I can only do phone calls right now, whatever your communication preferences, that can be really helpful to name. Things that were really helpful were drafted out of office messages. So I didn't have to think about that. I could just be like, copy, paste, throw that in. Definitely something to think through ahead of time if you know that you're going to need some space. And then some really helpful boundaries for during and then after a mental health crisis, if you can anticipate what those might look like. And then again, getting really familiar with those tools that we discussed earlier, the Family Medical Leave Act, the Family Medical Leave Assurance, the Sick Leave Bank, any other state resources. We have a slide at the end of this step that's called the State of Vermont Resources at a Glance. So that kind of puts everything together for your reference. So feel free to check that out.
So folks said the link in that slide was not working, so I put it in the chat, which will work for state employees, and we'll also drag in a copy of it into the chat. I'm done with this one. So before mental health crisis, as a supervisor, I think, again, we really recognize trust is trust was a prerequisite for us in all of this. And so it made it possible for me to be open to a conversation about these plans and mental health needs. So as a supervisor, to the extent that you have that relationship, really be open to that. Again, we all have this bias that's just in us. And so it's okay to feel uncomfortable in those conversations. I did not know what I was doing, but you can't let it stop you from supporting your folks. So walk through the discomfort, be okay with it, talk to me, talk to somebody else on your team, find someone to sort of bounce ideas off of and really test your bias a little bit. And then familiarize yourself with these tools, FMLA, FMLI, the sick leave bank, other resources your own workplace might have. Do that ahead of time. That can be really helpful so that you know already what that looks like. And it may help you one day, you don't really know. If an employee has disclosed a condition to you, offer that they are able to share your contact information with a trusted person. So in our case, that was Eve's spouse, and it was really helpful just to know that we were going to be able to communicate whatever that needed to look like. That was one of those things I was like, is that allowed? Am I allowed to do that? The answer is yes. The answer is pretty much with consent and with information from your employee, you can do a lot to really help, and you don't have to worry about getting in trouble.
Yeah, that was definitely really supportive, to know that there was communication that could happen outside of, me, in moments that was necessary. So this is hard because you're like in the thick of it, right? This is during a mental health crisis. So the first and foremost thing is just to like, whatever it needs to look like, take care of your mental health and your physical needs. And maybe that could mean adjusting medications. Maybe that could mean, figuring out a new sleep cycle or exercise cycle or whatever it is that you need to do. Getting additional therapy supports, none or all of the above. It's very individually based, but super, super critical here. Having those plans beforehand, that before part of the crisis, where you're filling out those crisis plan worksheets and things like that. And it doesn't have to be a worksheet. It can be like a notebook. It can be like, if you're somebody who keeps track of this stuff in your mind, fantastic. Like for me, having something to like plan it out and visualize was really supportive, and that's not going to work for everyone. But just kind of understanding like, okay, here is the planning that I did beforehand. How can I kind of think back to, what that thinking looks like to guide me right now in this moment. And then review, like, you might not know what your access needs look like, and that's okay. I think having someone to like check in on and like say, like asking like what are your access needs look like right now, and not knowing, it's totally fine. It's also like helpful to continue to have those conversations because it might become more clear as you kind of like move past the height of the crisis itself. And that will really also help you advocate for yourself and your needs and how you need to show up in the moment. So, and then communicating those needs to your supervisor, however possible, when it comes to like, this is the time I think I'm going to need off. It might need to shift, but like, this is what I'm thinking. Because if you have existing projects or things that you need coverage for, that can be really, really helpful. And again, if it's something that is not like, you don't have the capacity to do in that moment, that's okay too. If you have a trusted person, in my case, it was my spouse, like to be able to say like, hey, can you just let Gillian know X, Y, Z? And then like, know that you have like that support, can be really helpful. And then, yeah, I think that about covers it for that one.
Okay, during a mental health crisis as a supervisor, kind of the other side of that is adapting communication with your employee based on their needs. Again, that might mean maybe they only want to meet in person right now, or maybe they only want to talk on the phone, no video. Like there might be some really specific needs that they have. To the extent that you can support that, it can really help keep lines of communication open. ensure the employee or their support person has some of this basic information about these tools like FMLA, especially if it's a support person. Like these systems are hard to navigate on a blue sky day. It's extra hard when you're in a crisis, no matter what that crisis is. And so giving them that information kind of proactively can help them figure out what might be the most applicable in that situation. This one seems small, but I think it's actually kind of big. Offer to do your employee's timesheet for them. Timesheets suck. And I mess up my timesheet like a few times a year. And I just think it's a thing we can take off of somebody's plate as a supervisor, with the consent and input from the employee. Number 4 is be clear about your own boundaries, particularly around how you want to communicate, how often and when. So just like the employee is going to set up their communication preferences and tell you hopefully what they are, you really have to protect your own mental health in this moment too. And that might mean saying like, you can text me anytime, but I'm probably not going to answer after 4:30 or 5. Or I don't know, email me before you text me and give me a chance to let you know where I'm at that day. Whatever those needs are, clear communication in both directions can be really helpful. Number 5 is communicate with your HR manager for guidance. So again, I did this and kept it really general because I was worried about getting you in trouble. And I didn't want to make any mistakes that would cause harm to you. And now that I know what I know, I'm not as worried about that. But reaching out pretty quickly to your HR folks can be a great step to helping you understand what to think about, how to prioritize this moment. Like, what are those things that Eve's going to need to know to keep her paycheck coming and keep her benefits? You can ask those kinds of questions. And then the last one on here is make sure you're getting support for yourself, either through a therapist you already have, through InvestCAP, other trusted resources. I should have added here that you're still, always kind of goes without saying, but you're protecting confidentiality of your employees. So think about that as you reach out to folks, but definitely finding a way to take care of your own needs in this moment to help you be the best help to somebody else.
So some of that planning helps too when it comes to like, oh, we'll get there. I'm jumping ahead.
Okay, after a mental health crisis, the goal is, for us, the goal is that we do these things together. We may reconnect and recenter around what support the employee needs right now, what that looks like in this moment, revisit any planning we've done to prepare, to guide your thinking, and then take advantage of some of the tools that we heard about this morning on the ADA session. Alternate work schedules or flexible scheduling can be really helpful in making sure someone can still, maybe they have more doctor's appointments than normal right now and they need just some flexible time. There are lots of ways to do this that you have control over as a supervisor. You don't need like high up approval to give somebody a flexible work schedule in most cases. So try to use the tools that are available to you.
Yeah, we talk about the tools a lot in this presentation for a reason. They're really, really supportive. And thinking about, okay, so one of the biggest challenges for me with bipolar disorder was the aftermath of like coming out of like magical thinking and racing thoughts and being able to trust myself and my own thinking patterns. It's so disruptive to daily living, and coming out of that and the aftermath can almost be just as challenging, if not more so in different ways than being in the midst of it. So it really, like, coming back to that quote from Mangus around interdependence and like leaning on, each other for support, having solid supports was so critical. Like at home, at work, having these like trusted connections and being able to say like, I don't got this right now, but we got this, like that was huge. And thinking about like, as you're like, reshaping what your work needs to look like based on what your needs look like. So there are some examples on there for like, I need less in-person contact, and in these moments I need more in-person contact, right? Like, and for some people it's like lighting can be really intense. So thinking about what your lighting situation and like physical environment looks like. And then like if you have a big presentation or meeting that's coming up and you're like, I'm not in the headspace to be doing this right now. having those conversations and thinking about like, how can we postpone this or, make it look different in some way. And so like, as we're like working to build psychological safety in the workplace, as we're working on like inclusive practices, like how can we think about what does psychological safety look like for ourselves? This is somebody sharing screen that I totally don't want to be. How do I? Okay, thank you.
Share the thing.
Oh yeah, I gotta reshare. Now let me skip to most recent slide. Maybe not. Oh, sorry. This is gonna be unfortunate. If you don't want to get seasick, just close your eyes for a moment.
So we're not seeing.
Oh,
So we're good.
Okay, yeah. So just taking the space to like in this kind of after situation, reflecting on the experiences together and thinking about like, ooh, that was a doozy. Here's what went well. Here's what didn't work out so well. How do we want to be thinking through like if this happens again or if other folks go through this kind of thing? Like what were the things that it's kind of like that after action stuff that a lot of us do in the health department, like thinking through and planning and trying to learn from some of these pieces. So we want to go through a worksheet, and this can be a helpful prompt as we're like thinking through this.
Yep.
So maybe, yeah, awesome. Thank you for handing those out. This is something to consider are like, what are other ways to be supporting employees before, during, or after a mental health crisis? I know we talked about a lot of different strategies, and this is also just based on our experience. Again, like there's so many different ways and so many different things that folks might need when it comes to support. And then here, Gillian is handing out our workplace mental health crisis planning worksheet.
And we're gonna put a link.
Okay, I already did that.
Yeah, so this, more caveats, this is our tool. This is not from HR, this is not,
Yeah.
I mean, these are questions that we want to ask ourselves, and writing it down was helpful. So if this is helpful, you're welcome to steal it. If it's not helpful, use it, it's fine. We really just found that there were a lot of tools out in the world for planning your personal need, like your personal life needs around a mental health crisis, not so much for the workplace. So this, as you can see, just has some questions. You can fill it out alone, you can fill it with a friend, you can fill it with your family, with your supervisor if that's safe for you. But it offers some prompts just to get you thinking. One of the things that was really helpful, I think we wanted to call out, was pre-drafting some out-of-office messages that you feel good about. Like, decide with a clear mind what you want to be disclosing, because you don't know what you're going to want to put in there in that moment. And so like little tangible things like that can be really helpful to set you up for success.
I definitely at one point put in my away message, I am floating in space, which was like totally fine, but like doesn't really tell you much, and like it's helpful to have some canned messages.
So we offer this if it's helpful. It's just a guide that we
And there's a lot of folks that have supported making this. So shout out to the health department colleagues and disability and chronic illness employee research group for all the insights and feedback and shaping this. And I'm sure it will continue to evolve as we like learn more and as more folks maybe get the chance to use it. So big appreciation to y'all. Here are some resources that might be supportive for, they're like community-based resources for crisis support. And some of these are Chittenden focused. Some of them are statewide. So like the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline is the first one. Next is the Mental Health Urgent Care from Howard Center. And then we have from National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI Vermont, there's the Mental Illness and Recovery Workshop that they offer. And then Vermont Care Partners has an intake and support and crisis lines. And then finally, there's some links to different interfaith and religious community supports. So hopefully that can support us people.
And then this slide, on slide 23, if you are just wanting to learn more about mental health and other invisible disabilities in the workplace, these are some places to start. More caveats coming. So from the Society for Human Resource Management, there's a website about supporting invisible disabilities in the workplace. From understood.org, something similar. And then from the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, there's a great resource on depression, PTSD, and other mental health conditions in the workplace about your legal rights. Big caveat there, we looked at it on February 28th of this year, and it was still good, still had what we would want it to have. But in this time when some federal resources are the target of edits, you might want to proceed with caution. Oh, and this is just an at a glance version of those, like, I'm going to print this out and put it in my workspace for myself, but just an at a glance version for folks that have final those state resources.
And you can find on your tables and on the walls another evaluation link if for folks who are joining online. Hopefully this works for you. I guess you could even try and take a screenshot from your phone of the screen for where you are if you really want us to. We really appreciate that this conference is like very much looks at feedback and has taken a lot of information from previous, like the last year's sessions. And we really, really value that and want to hear your thoughts and how we can improve this information. So that's all we have for you today. And we would love any questions, comments. Yeah.
So when we talk about a crisis, it feels like it's a very time-bound event or maybe a short term. That's what I was thinking when I was. But if you have somebody that's going through a longer term, it turns into be like a longer term. So like when we were going through COVID, I would say people were in mental health crisis for a long period of time. And I'm starting to hear that people are feeling that way right now with things that are happening politically, socially. So what does that look like when it turns into a year, 2 years, longer? And then protections like FMLA is short term, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's the FMLA is pretty limited to the 12 months. And so like in my case, my disability is pretty cyclical. And these are like have like a time frame that can be stopped or supported with medication. However, that's not the case for everyone. And so thinking about like each individual and like when people need to take a step back, and maybe they need an extended period of time that is beyond FMLA, right? Like it's not a catch-all. Like it can't cover everybody's needs. It could cover up to, what was it, the 12 weeks, right? And then thinking about like maybe this person does really need an alternate schedule, or like if they know that like this time of day is really, really challenging, or this time of year is really challenging. Maybe this is like something that happened. Maybe somebody has seasonal affected things going on. Maybe like in COVID, like there was so much of that interdependent need, right? That like we don't got this, but we got each other kind of thing. So like how can we think about how like these are tools that can help an individual, but outside of these tools, community support is hands down like the biggest kind of factor in kind of maintaining and stabilizing in the long run, right? So I don't think I have an answer for like if someone is in that like deep of a crisis for that extended period of time, what that would mean. And it like there are situations in which people do need to go on leave, and that's totally fine. So I think that each of these tools has its limits for sure. And thinking about like what are the tools that can serve us, and if it's not, like if there's a tool that's not going to serve, like thinking about okay, what are the supports that can be in place outside of this? if that makes sense.
And then like talk to HR. I think those are two really unique, unfortunately, not so unique that like I'm looking around the room and I'm like, we all work through that. But they are different than this kind of like you drop into a crisis that has sort of an end to. That's a little different, so I'm not sure.
Follow up to that, just to that end. So, my experience with that, like, your doctor has to like provide a date or something, or it's going to give you a very hard time with that. So is that like if somebody doesn't have that, like, and they just know that they're in a, right? You have to have that medical documentation.
So I think for a lot of instances, they try and get a date, but for some cases it's intermittent, or in certain cases, it's like there is no end date, right? So you don't always have to have that on the paperwork. I think that what's challenging is like the leave time, right? Like, so I think that for some folks, they do have like intermittent leave, and they need to leave for a certain amount of time per month, or they like there's just different, and maybe for themselves, and maybe for a family member, maybe for somebody else that they're caring for, right? Like there's so many complex and varied situations. It can look so different for everyone. So I think that's also why we're like, this was our situation. These are the tools that we used. Here's like how far they can take you, but also they can't solve everything.
I'm just curious if you have, any way, so I'm thinking, in a terms of an employee that maybe isn't ready to open up or talk to their supervisor, like how else can a supervisor support them if they don't necessarily know what is going on, or what would really benefit them at that time?
I mean, I have to go. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably the case for a lot of people. The stigmatized nature of all of this is that means that we are not great at talking about this yet, or receiving this information. I'm thinking a couple of things. There are like ADA things to keep in mind about that I do not know about and would be better asked to somebody else. But I think in general, sharing things, if you're saying this is someone who like has disclosed nothing to you and you just are kind of getting a vibe that there's something going on, I would think you could think about how to broadly share some of this information so that there's widespread knowledge of these, like this FMLA helps everybody. Like disability is not an if, it's a when. So knowing all this stuff is helpful for all of us all the time. Or knowing how to use a sick leave bank, even if you're just someone who's considering donating to it, knowing how it works can be helpful. So finding ways to make sure like your whole team has some of this information. They hear about, like you're at HealthPro with us, they hear about the peer support network and they know that that's a confidential resource available to them. They keep hearing stories about people using InvestCAP, which, like hearing about it is one thing. Hearing people say that they've used it and found it helpful is another thing. So I don't know. My guess is HR would have a maybe broader answer about what to do if someone needs support, but they haven't asked for it. There's complication there that I don't know enough about.
Just came from the session on the ABA. So yeah, the Disabilities Act, and thinking about what that, I think they call it the interactive process. So like getting to that space of like rather than asking outright, sometimes it can be helpful to say like, especially during the COVID response, like all of us were struggling. So being really transparent about like, this is what I'm going through right now. I've noticed that like other folks are going through it too. How is this impacting you? Kind of like saying things in kind of a more general way, if that feels okay. And of course, it'll depend on the situation. But kind of saying like, oof, like this is kind of using the I statements first and saying like, this is what I'm experiencing, like, and maybe that'll support someone to feel like, oh, I have space to open up about this, and maybe it won't, and that's okay. Like they might not be there yet. So I think patience, time, building this kind of like culture of like, we can talk about this, it's okay, is getting us closer? Good question.
Oh, I have a question. So this is Hope. My question actually is for you, Eve, and it's more about, well, first of all, thank you for sharing your story. Wow. Gillian, what an amazing example as a supervisor. Yeah, that's how I know. I just want to help you guys. But Eve, what if Julian wasn't as supportive? Or what if you want to disclose, but you're a supervisor and you just do not have that relationship? I'm wondering if you have any advice for those kind of situations where, you're not safe with your supervisor.
Yeah, totally. So this actually, our working relationship was the first time that I actually came out of the disability closet, if you will, for folks with disabilities. And was very transparent around my experience. But I didn't really feel safe or that I could do that in other situations before. So thinking about I think one time with a previous supervisor, something came up and I didn't want to explain what the situation was. So I just said, I had some anxiety or, I had some symptom that was going on, but I didn't really want to talk about it. And I think that being able to talk about what's going on it does take so much trust. It takes being in a space where you kind of processed it yourself. And, I'm still working on a lot of internalized ableism. So I'm still on that journey. I think I've also come a long way in that space. And I also sometimes find myself feeling like I'm moving backwards in that space. It's very nonlinear. And so yeah, it does take having that takes that modeling of on the supervisor part. So Gillian is a fantastic supervisor, and it's really easy to be able to trust and share, right? In this in our supervisor space. Okay, yeah, thank you for showing up the way you do. But I know that has not always been my experience, and I know that is not everybody's. Fortunately, that's often not the case, right? And so trying to maybe focus on what the access needs are if you don't want to disclose the disability itself, but think about this. I'm learning a lot about this interactive process and what the information is that you need to share versus you don't have to share the whole story, right? But it can be supportive if that feels like you're in a safe space to do something. So yeah, that answer. We're at noon. I'm glad to stick around if folks want to have other questions or want to go back in any of the slides or talk about any of these things. So thank you so much for going out today.